Good evening. My name is Cliff Schaffer, and I am the creator and co-author of the Hoover Resolution. The first question we need to ask here is, what is the Hoover Resolution? Well, as many of you already realize, our drug war has been an abject failure. It has not succeeded in stamping out drugs, and it has caused more problems than it has solved. Unfortunately, it is a very politically volatile issue, and we find it very hard to get political support behind real drug policy reform. Everyone wants to vote for mandatory minimums and putting more people in jail. It seems to be the popular thing to do. We needed a new strategy to produce drug policy reform, and so on February 26, 1993, a group of prominent citizens met at the Hoover Institution at Stanford, California, and together we drafted a resolution which calls for an objective federal commission to review the facts on drugs and to rewrite American drug policy from the ground up. And I would like to read to you the Hoover Resolution so that you will know exactly what it says and exactly what we are supporting. This is the resolution. Whereas the overall situation regarding the use of drugs in our society and the crime and misery that accompanies it has continued to deteriorate for several decades, and whereas our society has continued to attempt, at enormous financial cost and loss of civil liberties, to resolve drug abuse problems through the criminal justice system with the accompanying increases of prisons and numbers of inmates, and whereas the huge untaxed revenues generated by the illicit drug trade are undermining legitimate governments worldwide, and whereas the present system has spawned a cycle of hostility by the incarceration of disproportionate numbers of African Americans, Hispanics, and other minority groups, and whereas the number of people who have contracted AIDS, hepatitis, and other diseases from contaminated hypodermic needles is epidemic under our present system, and whereas in our society's zeal to pursue our criminal approach, legitimate medical uses for the relief of pain and suffering of patients have been suppressed. Therefore, be it resolved that our society must recognize drug use and abuse as the medical and social problems that they are, and that they must be treated with medical and social solutions. And further be it resolved that an objective commission be immediately empowered by the President and by Congress to recommend revision of the drug laws of these United States in order to reduce the harm our current policies are causing. What we are seeking is an objective federal commission to lay all of the evidence on the table in full view of the American public, to review the evidence in its entirety, and to form a new drug policy based on the evidence. Since this resolution was first signed on February 26, 1993, it has gained tremendous support from all around the world. Some of the original people who signed this resolution at that meeting included Dr. Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize-winning economist; Dr. Joseph McNamara, former police chief of San Jose and a fellow of the Hoover Institution at Stanford; Dr. Herbert Berger, an internationally recognized authority on drug treatment; Judge James P. Gray of Orange County Superior Court; Dr. Frederick Myers, the professor of pharmacology at the University of California at San Francisco and chairman of the California Research Advisory Panel on Drugs. Among the people who have signed it since that meeting include Kurt Schmoke, mayor of Baltimore; George Shultz, former Secretary of State; Frank Jordan, mayor of the city of San Francisco; Susan Hammer, mayor of the city of San Jose; Elihu Harris, mayor of the city of Oakland; Robert Nolan, mayor of the city of Upland; Assemblyman John Vasconcellos of the California State Assembly; Senator Joseph Gallagher of the New York State Senate, and many others. We have also received signatures from the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the California Democratic Council, the Libertarian Party of America, the San Francisco Drug Advisory Board, and many other organizations. We have also received the signatures of Anthony Ribera, Chief of Police of San Francisco, California, Lou Covarrubias, Chief of Police of San Jose, California, Bob Nicolini, Acting Chief of Police of Oakland, California, Michael Hennessy, Sheriff of the City and County of San Francisco, and Nicholas Pastore, Chief of Police of New Haven, Connecticut. Now, these are only a few. We have literally thousands of people who have signed this resolution calling for an objective federal commission to review the evidence on drugs and to form a new drug policy. In reviewing the evidence, we need to ask ourselves some basic questions about why our drug policy is the way it is. The first question we need to ask is, what was the original reason for the drug laws? Why were these laws passed in the first place? Most Americans seem to assume that simply because we have the laws, that they must have been passed for some good reason. For example, they protect public health and safety. Well, that was not the reason at all. There were two primary reasons for the drug laws: racism and ignorance. Opiates were first outlawed in the United States because of the fear that Chinese men were luring white women to their ruin in opium dens. Ruin was defined not as opium addiction, but as associating with Chinese men. And in fact, the first federal law on the subject outlawed opium trading for Chinese, but not for whites. The entire object of these laws from the very beginning was purely racism. Cocaine was outlawed because of the fear that superhuman Negro cocaine fiends would drink large amounts of Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola, which contained cocaine at the time, which would cause them to go on a violent sexual rampage and rape white women. At the time the laws were passed, police nationwide switched from a .32 caliber to .38 caliber pistols because, as one chief of police was quoted as saying, "Those cocaine niggers sure are hard to kill." The test of whether a black man was on cocaine was whether he was acting strangely in the eyes of a white police officer, and the test of how much cocaine he had was how many shots it took to kill him. It was a very simple method of reasoning. Marijuana was outlawed largely because of racial prejudice against Mexican laborers coming over the border to seek jobs during the Depression. It is important to note that at the time these laws were passed, there never was any medical evidence at all to indicate that these drugs were even harmful. In fact, at the time the first anti-drug laws were passed, the American Medical Association, the New York Medical Association, and the Illinois Medical Association all said that these laws would be a medical, social, and criminal disaster. And they were right. 10 years after the laws were passed, the medical organizations were continuing to write editorials decrying these laws, saying what a disaster they were. The modern excuses that we have for these laws, that they protect public health and safety, and that if we didn't have them, then everyone would be addicts, arose only in the 1950s and 1960s, when it became apparent that the old excuses of racism and ignorance simply would not work anymore. The next question we need to ask ourselves is, what do the experts say? In the last 50 years, there have been many, many reviews of our drug laws and the facts around them. And interestingly enough, they all came back with the same answer. They all recommended decriminalization. And I would just like to read to you some of these studies that have been performed and which reached this conclusion. The LaGuardia Committee report, commissioned by Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia of New York, written by the New York Academy of Medicine and published by the City of New York in 1944. The Baroness Wooten report, published by the Government of the United Kingdom in 1967. The report of the Canadian Government Commission of Inquiry into the Non-Medical Use of Drugs, published by the Canadian Government in 1969. That is the most comprehensive report ever done by the Canadian Government. Dealing with Drug Abuse, a report to the Ford Foundation, published by the Drug Abuse Survey Project in 1972. The Consumers Union Report on Licit and Illicit Drugs, published by the editors of Consumer Reports magazine in 1972. This book is a must-read for anyone who is interested in the subject. The report of the National Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse, commissioned by President Nixon and published by the U.S. federal government in 1973. The Nation's Toughest Drug Law, evaluating the New York experience, published by the Joint Committee on New York Drug Law Evaluation of the Association of the Bar of the City of New York in 1977. The Facts About Drug Abuse, published by the United States Drug Abuse Council in 1980. An Analysis of Marijuana Policy, published by the National Research Council of the National Academy of Sciences in 1982. And most recently, the report of the California State Research Advisory Panel on Drugs, commissioned by the state of California in 1967 and finally published in 1990. That was a 23-year study. The recommendations in these reports were endorsed by, among others, the American Medical Association, the American Bar Association, the American Association for Public Health, the National Education Association, and the National Council of Churches. When we review the evidence on drug policy, it is very clear that the evidence overwhelmingly supports decriminalization. And this is even true for the law and order conservatives who have studied the issue, such as with President Nixon's National Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse. For anyone who is interested in further information on what I am going to say today, I would recommend that they start with the Consumers Union Report on Licit and Illicit Drugs by the editors of Consumer Reports magazine. This book has most of the basic information that is contained in all of the other reports. It is, however, the most readable, and it is available through most local libraries. It is a stunningly interesting book, and I would recommend it to anyone. Next, we need to understand what are the facts regarding drugs in America today. And the first fact that we really need to understand is, how bad is the drug problem? How many people are actually killed by drugs? This chart shows the number of drug deaths in the United States in any typical year. And these numbers come directly from U.S. federal government statistics, and they have been relatively stable for the last decade or so. Tobacco kills about 390,000 people per year. Alcohol kills at least 80,000 people per year, not counting deaths on the road or homicides. Side-stream tobacco smoke kills at least 50,000 people per year. Prescription drugs kill at least 10,000 people per year. All of the illegal drugs combined kill about 4,500 people in a typical year, or about 1% of the number killed by alcohol and tobacco. Cocaine typically kills about 2,200 people a year. Aspirin kills about 2,000 people a year. Heroin kills about 2,000 people a year, and there has not been a recorded death from marijuana in United States history. And as a matter of fact, the Drug Enforcement Administration itself says that there has not been a recorded death from marijuana in the entire history of mankind. As a matter of fact, they went on to say that marijuana is probably the safest therapeutic substance known to mankind. Despite the fact that only 4,500 people are killed in a typical year from illegal drugs, we now have almost 600,000 people in prison for illegal drugs. This means that for every person who dies from illegal drugs, about 100 people go to prison. This is totally out of whack. This next chart shows the rise in the number of people in state and federal prisons over the last 50 years. The number of people in prison has been stable since about 1926, when they first started keeping records. That is, until we got into the 1970s and President Nixon began to enact tougher drug laws in a campaign against drugs. Since then, the number has been steadily escalating. It has tripled since 1980. We now have more than 1 million people in jail because of nonviolent, a total of 1 million people in jail. By the year 2000, we will have about 3 million people in jail at the present rates of incarceration. About 2/3 of them will be there for nonviolent drug offenses. About 2/3 of them will be black men. The next chart shows the racial breakdown of the prisoners in state and federal institutions. The bottom portion here is the number of white prisoners. The top portion is the number of black prisoners. Despite the fact that black people in our society account for only 13% of the total population, they will soon account for more than 2/3 of all of the people in our prisons. The majority of them will go there for non-violent drug offenses. This is simply unnecessary. When we look at a breakdown of why people go to prison, when we compare white with black, we can see a few interesting facts. In many categories of crime, such as robbery, murder, and most other crimes, there is no difference, or no perceivable difference, in the sentencing rates of black and white men. However, in drugs, black men are at least 24% more likely to be sentenced to prison for a drug offense than a comparable white man. There are a number of factors behind that, but it is true nonetheless. In some particular areas of the drug war, we have a tremendous imbalance. The mandatory minimums that have been applied, where people are sentenced to a mandatory minimum term in prison, not a maximum, but a mandatory minimum, apply mostly to crack cocaine. Now, crack cocaine is not substantially different from regular cocaine, and in fact, anyone who has regular cocaine can manufacture crack cocaine right in their own kitchen. But there are one set of laws for crack cocaine, and there are another set of laws for regular cocaine. The penalties for crack cocaine are substantially higher. As a result of this, 95% of all of the people imprisoned for crack cocaine, where the mandatory minimums apply, are black men. It is a ratio of about 20-1. When we look at the issue of asset forfeitures, we also find a tremendous imbalance. When the asset forfeiture laws were first enacted, they were enacted as a tool to break up drug rings, to punish drug dealers, major drug dealers, for their drug use, to attach their assets that they had acquired through ill-gotten means, or through illegal means. However, that is not what is happening. More than 80% of all asset forfeitures are not levied against major drug kingpins. They are levied on assets that are worth $50,000 or less against ordinary citizens. These are not being used against drug kingpins. Most often it is a person's car, a person's house, or some other personal property, not the yachts and boats and planes that we normally hear about. Also, 80% of all of these forfeitures are made against black people, specifically black men. We have a tremendous imbalance here. What we have is a situation where a police officer can stop anybody on the street and then, on the basis of suspicion, confiscate their car right out from under them. And as we have recently learned here in Los Angeles from one sheriff's officer who was convicted of corruption, he testified that police officers in Los Angeles commonly do this arbitrarily. They will see a car that they like, they will stop the car, tell the occupant to get out, tell them that they are under suspicion of a drug crime, and confiscate the car right there. And the person who suffers that essentially has no legal recourse at all. It is up to the person who had their property seized to prove that they are innocent. It is not up to the police to prove that the person is guilty and therefore they have a justification for seizing it. What it comes down to is a question of cost effectiveness. It costs us approximately $500,000 to put one person in prison. That consists of $150,000 for the arrest and prosecution process, $150,000 to build a new prison cell because we don't have any new prison cells to put these people in, and approximately $150,000, that is $30,000 times 5 years, to keep these people in prison for 5 years, for a total of almost $500,000 to put a single person in prison. That same $500,000 can provide treatment or education for more than 100 people. Now, another benefit of the treatment and education approach is that the person we put in jail is completely a drain upon society. They don't earn any income, they don't pay any taxes. If we treat people and give them education, we can have these people out on the street, we can have them employed, they can remain employed and they can pay taxes just like everybody else. This is why we believe that we need a complete review of American drug policy. The Hoover Resolution has already paid off, and I would ask everyone to support our actions. We have already passed AB 1072 in the California State Legislature, which is currently awaiting the signature of Governor Wilson, which will call for a commission here in the state of California to review and rewrite California drug policy. We have also introduced into the House of Representatives in Congress Bill number H.R. 3100, which calls for a federal commission to review and rewrite drug policy. We ask everyone to support these laws, to write to their elected officials and tell them to support AB 1072 in California and H.R. 3100 in Congress. Please write today. We need this commission as soon as possible. I would like to say that this has been a real surprise to us, how quickly this has taken off. We have gained support from all over the world. We have signed resolutions coming in literally from England, the Netherlands, Italy, Australia, and many other countries around the world because they have seen the wisdom behind this approach. We do not ask anyone to support any particular agenda for solving the drug problem. We simply want an open and honest hearing where we can review all of the evidence in front of the American public, get it televised, gavel to gavel on C-SPAN, and let the American public see for themselves what the evidence is. I have read the evidence, I know what it says. That is why I feel so confident in asking for a simple, open, and honest review. Again, I would ask all of you, support AB 1072 in the state of California and H.R. 3100 in Congress. Thank you very much.